Right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to our Aspire View webinar today. And, this is number, I think, 3 of a whole series of these that we're going to be having over the next several months. If you're taking the time today to listen, either by way of live recording or live webinar or the recording, we just know that says a lot about you, and you're the kind of leader that wants to grow. And so we're going to jump straight into things this morning. I'm joined by Dr. Larry Kuhn. We'll get to him in just a minute. He's going to be presenting and really walking us through a great conversation. But as we kick off today, I wonder if you can think of a time or perhaps a person that maybe you were really close to. You had great relationship with them. You maybe it was a friend, a family member, or a coworker, and things were good. And then all of a sudden, for one reason or another, maybe you didn't have a big blow up. Things are just not the same. You don't speak as much. You don't talk. The relationship is tense, and in one way or another, we're looking at that, and we know that is emotional cutoff, relational cutoff, or as we commonly say in today's culture, cancel culture. And we know that that's not just online. It's not just a thing we see in big media or in celebrity world, but it happens in our day-to-day life in a variety of different ways. And right now, stats are showing that 61% of U.S. adults are familiar with the phrase cancel culture. It's not some new phenomenon. It's becoming a regular occurring thing. According to SHRM, 2/3 of U.S. employees report experiencing or witnessing some form of cutoff over the past month. 70% of employees report being some way, shape, or form ignored or ostracized, whether it's covert or perhaps intentional. And this one hits a little closer to home. 27% of Americans would say that they are estranged from a close family member. And so based on all of that, it's obvious to us that cutoff and cancel culture is not distant or far off, but it is happening all over the place. And so today we want to take the next 30 minutes to talk about why this happens. And we're going to make sure that you leave today with 3 moves that you can try on this week to start closing the gap on some of the relationships that you might be experiencing some of that canceling or cutoff right in the middle of. And so, Dr. Larry, I'm grateful to be having this conversation with you and to hear from you today. And, when it comes to relational estrangement, cancel culture, whatever we want to cut off, whatever we want to call it, rather, most people are stuck. They either don't know what to do, don't know what caused it, don't know how to prevent it. And so I just wonder if someone's feeling that way today, where would they even start with something like this?
Thanks, Luke. There's a lot of experiences that people have when they feel anxious. And as Luke just mentioned, we want to provide you with 3 very specific tools of things that you can do. And we're kind of moving towards one of them, just to even taking a look at the toll that goes on, that happens when people are canceled or when they experience it on whatever side. And it's kind of interesting when you unpack it. For sure, there's a physiological response. There's an anxiety spike when there's conflict. And when something happens that either something that we care about is triggered, or our life is triggered, or something that we really value is triggered, that fight or flight response kicks in. Not everybody gets a fight response. There's a whole lot of people that get a fight, a flight, or a freeze, or even what we call tend and befriend. That response is a reactive response when we feel it, like our emotions come up and there's a physiological thing that's going on here. Well, this certainly does relate to relational estrangement, and there are behavioral signs and kind of risk factors that you may be heading toward that type of an experience. He talked about the stats. It's pretty alarming how many people in the workplace and at home are impacted by this cutoff that happens. It's emotional reaction that isn't open and aggressive. It's kind of a withdrawal, a silencing. We know that Gottman, in his research, identified that when couples begin to stonewall one another and they shut down with that silencing, it is a strong predictor of divorce, but they don't even see it coming. And that's often that experience that people get blindsided by this. And so we want to look at that. We often can see some behavioral signs that happen, risk factors, when you feel like there's a pursue withdraw dynamic. It's almost like, years ago, Tom and Jerry, the cat chasing the mouse. And that happens until the cat no longer pursues. And then the mouse is like, well, wait a minute, this is how we're supposed to do it. And that happens a lot in relationships when you start seeing this dynamic that one person is withdrawing and another person feels like they're doing all the work or they're pursuing. One of the other things, Luke, that seems to happen a lot is there's subtle name calling. So when adult children get together and they begin to reinforce each other's view that their parents are just narcissists. So on that side of it, the ones who are kind of preparing to cut off, it doesn't just happen out of the blue. There are factors that are occurring. And the same thing even happens with parents. They start talking with one another about how their children are spoiled, how they're ungrateful, they're uncaring. Look at how much we've done for them. I mean, they're feeling neglected. Managers can do the same thing. I've seen them in the workplace. They get together, and even though maybe the formal cutoff hasn't happened and people are still having some communication, there's this underlying communications that are happening. And I'm suggesting that one of the things that we really need to do to be able to prevent cutoff and this emotional or relational estrangement is to become aware when we are falling into that and we don't even know it, and we're starting to have these conversations rather than going directly to the person and saying, hey, what's going on? Another thing that often happens, just part of the dynamics of that relationship that begins to fracture, there is a series of losses, clusters of losses. There's a loss of trust. There's a loss of productivity. Imagine too, when somebody stops talking, I'll get these types of calls that, I'll be called into the workplace and we need you, Dr. Larry, to help facilitate because we've got two people that have stopped talking to one another and they're supposed to be working together, but they literally have not talked to the other person for the past 6 months. I mean, I've seen that go even longer than that. And then you kind of bring them in and they're not making any eye contact. They each have retreated into their own echo chambers. They have their supporters, and usually they're rounding up those supporters to see it a different way. And you begin to see not just a little friction, it's like all out war. I've seen some crazy stuff that people engage in. You'd think they're adults, but man, it's like there's a very primal reactivity that's happening. And the kicker to it all is when that cutoff happens, it impacts others, other family members. When two family members have a fracture and they stop talking, the rest of the family's like, what are we supposed to do? Same thing with coworkers. It puts everybody in a really difficult position. At the same time, it kind of freezes the relationship and it prevents for either party to be able to see how others are changing or improving, because all they remember is really this is what happened at that one event. The grudge sets in and there's like no opportunity for any repairing to happen. And it kind of brings me just, overall in psychology, there is a lot of literature, a lot of research on the concept of attachment, how people form relationships, how they connect with one another. We fall in love, we meet someone, maybe there's common interest, maybe proximity and chance pushes us together and you begin to relate. Maybe you've gone through a really difficult time and You know, you survived a hurricane or you went through devastation, big losses, and suddenly there's a connection. So everybody's all talking about attachment, but the other side of attachment is loss. And people really don't know how to end well. And either relationships end in the form of like a train wreck that's a huge explosion and we're done. But oftentimes it ends kind of more with a whimper where there's not any resolution, things aren't being addressed, it's being avoided, and we just kind of let it go. And the equivalent of like on social media, well, I'm just going to unfriend them and I'm done. You know, one of the things that I did prior to this event today was I created a little type form screen that you know, explores where people are, and it's kind of interesting to see how people responded to that. Basically, in the past 12 months, so here's kind of the results of those. How often have you experienced someone at work, or in your family going quiet, ghosting or avoiding, cutting off? 50% of responders said very often, and 50% of responders said fairly often, not very often, pretty often overall. In the past 12 months, how often have you pulled back in your contact to manage stress and conflict? We had 25% said fairly frequently, 25% said not too often, and 50% said I don't do it at all. What about when do you most notice emotional cutoff? And we've seen that people said a number of things there that basically it's when people withdraw, that's when they most notice it. Where do you see it often happen? Most people, it happens most of the time in their family of origin. Actually, 75% of the people that responded said family of origin. Some of them occasionally have it in friendships. About 50% said, yes, I've seen it in the online community. The types of triggers that people identify that often precede these cutoffs, what do we know? Can we even notice that it's beginning to happen instead of just waiting until it blindsides us? They identified past unresolved conflicts. 25% said a perceived disrespect that is there and then it builds up. 25% said actually it's political and social issues that are causing it. And 25% said it's value clashes. So it's kind of like any of these things can happen. Common experiences when you have been either the victim or a participant or affected by it. Most people, 50% of responses said, I feel confused. They don't know what happened. Why did this happen? 25% said, I feel angry, and 25% identified the feeling of hopelessness. In terms of when you think about a person who you've had a conflict with recently, how psychologically safe did you feel in raising difficult topics with them? 75% said, I did not feel safe at all. 25% said, that didn't really affect me too much. So just kind of some interesting stats, I thought, from responses that we've gotten from others. That, you know, we've heard about people quitting a job and they call that quiet quitting. I think that same thing happens when we're doing quiet quitting in relationships. And I just thought, you know, Luke, it's really interesting from a psychological perspective to look at what's happening here as a relational dynamic. And what I want to bring to the table and just kind of throw out there, Bowen Family Systems is a theory and an approach that looks at family systems and relationships and workplace through a systems lens. And it basically identifies several factors that I think are really at play when we're talking about cancel culture, emotional distancing, cutoff, and avoidance. So there's three concepts. Number one is the concept of anxiety. Systems that are anxious begin to behave in observable and predictable ways. When a system gets all stirred up, and Bowen actually uses an example of an anthill, that if you kick the anthill, and it's a big anthill, somehow, even though these are not sentient beings, they're just basically a behavior system, these ants that are connected to one another through the colony, they begin, even though you kick it on one side, suddenly the ants on the other side begin to get all stirred up and anxious. That's what Bowen would actually use to describe an emotion. So, an emotional system is an anxious system, and it gets all stirred up. And then he related that also to what happens when a child is making its developmental pathway of disconnecting and getting its own self-identity. And he called that differentiation. And he said this, and he found in his research that families that are more well differentiated, meaning that it's okay for us to be different, the more well differentiated they are, the less anxious they become when there's difference. So there's actually a systemic thing that's happening here when people begin to feel the urge of pulling away and cutting off. And then what he said was, then we see that there is always kind of a group of people that when a system gets anxious because of differences, that group of people will withdraw and pull away. They'll run. And then there's another group of people who are sensing that it's beginning to get fragmented, and they'll pursue and try to rescue everybody so we can all get along again together. And what everybody wants to do is, let's calm down this anxiety in the system. I've seen this in meetings where we're all getting along, or maybe you're having a conversation with someone and you're like, oh yeah, we all see it the same way. Isn't that interesting? And then somebody drops the bombshell that they voted for someone or they saw it differently, and suddenly it's like this icy grip, and then you begin to react, and then somebody will jump in and say, oh well, no, they'll become the distractor. I mean, these roles begin to emerge, and I see this so frequently in families and organizations that become anxious. And Bowen found that even in families, if a family tends to be more anxiety prone and less differentiated, meaning they're able to hold on to themselves and have differences, and then if they're less so, then they tend to attract partners who are also less differentiated. So what you often have are people that feel very comfortable like behaving and interacting at a systemic level in that way. It's really kind of interesting. And what often happens is we get blindsided by this. There are actually 3 different things that are most commonly in the literature found to show what causes this to happen. Number 1 is diverging values or perspectives. Right now in the workplace, we have 4 generations, and we're going to do this as a topic one of these days very soon. We've got boomers, we've got Gen X, we've got Gen Y, we've got Gen Z. They all have very different values and different perspectives. That's one of the main reasons why people will say, well, yes, I emotionally cut off. Now, when I say emotional cutoff, this is where Bowen actually used that term. And he said, this is an interesting thing, Luke. He said that the person who leaves and like moves to the other side of the country and says, I'm done, that person, when they depart, they are really only departing the physical location. They are still just as what we would call emotionally fused with the people that they're in conflict with. But they've just carried that and those symptoms someplace else. So we see diverging values and perspectives that often trigger this anxiety, and then certain people tend to withdraw, pull back. They will shut down communications, often because not just of divergent values, but perhaps because there were expectations and role expectations, the way that I thought it was going to be, and then that gets violated. So that can trigger it. A third one is if you have a history of this, if you were raised in a family where emotional cutoff was the norm, then there's a sense sometimes that if I can't control a situation or if I can't control you, I'll control me. And so I'll just pick up my marbles and I'll go home. The basic one sentence takeaway is this: cutoff and emotional distancing and cancellation will reduce symptoms, but not the problem. And often it becomes a reinforcement of a continued pattern. And we don't think it's any big deal. We're done with it. Well, we've actually now reinforced that into this is my way of doing these things.
Mm.
So, I mean, it happens all too frequently and it's really painful.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful, and just getting some of the systems and the structure. We're very familiar with the experience, but why? How does it start? Where does it come from? And really noticing all the ways that it shows up in, be it family, home, the workplace, for sure. And so, Dr. Larry, I know we're trying to keep these on 30 minutes time here. I'm curious, in our last few minutes, if you could share some of the moves that we might take to reverse the cutoff, if we want to bring health and life and connectivity back into some of our relationships. Where would we start?
Absolutely. I think the first thing is beginning to look at what we do in terms of our role that we play. If we can get insight into our role, that's pretty important. What I'll do, I'm going to launch here on the screen and allow folks to see some potential ways that they react. And I'll let you kind of talk about that a little bit, Luke, if you could, because I think you've noticed certain roles and even roles that you gravitated to. So go ahead.
Yeah, big time. I mean, depending on the environment and depending on the people I'm around, some people like to play the role of the rescuer, the fixer. Don't worry, I'll just self-sabotage myself and do whatever I can to make things right. I know I learned to play that as a child in a number of ways. Some people play the victim. It's everyone else's fault. There's no way it's Luke's fault. Trust me. It's not. It's you. It's not me. It's you. It's the system. It's the workplace. The persecutor certainly shows up. You know what it's like when you're on the other side of a persecutor. They want to control you. They're going to aim for having the stronger hand in the position, or the critic, the person that just tears you down because of what you did. The clown, this is one that shows up for me as well. If I'm honest, I like to deflect the tension in a relationship with, I'll just be funny. I'll crack a joke, or I'll not address the thing that we need to address by way of making humor or making light of the situation. Or some people like to be the organizer or controller. Let's systemize this, or let's find a way that I don't have to see them again because I'll just organize my way out of it. And certainly the one that we're all familiar with is the distancer. This is the person that just moves away from the whole thing, or avoids the conflict in total.
Very observable and predictable patterns.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I think it's useful for us to do is to gain insight into that pattern, which ends up being kind of a role. I remember growing up as a kid, I watched Gilligan's Island, and Bob Denver got cast into the role of Gilligan. I mean, his entire life, that was his role, and he never shook it. It's almost like Spock. He got stuck in that role. You can't hardly see Leonard Nimoy as anybody different than Spock. That role is so strong with us, and we get into that role, and I find frequently it's a role that actually began when we were very young, and we learned how to behave and how to feel certain things more dominantly than others. And then we just continue in that, particularly when we're under stress or pressure. The second thing that I think people can do, Luke, is to normalize the pattern. You know, I've found that it's really useful to ask people just every so often, What do you really need right now? And what's that thing that you do when you don't get your needs met? And then to say, it kind of makes a whole lot of sense. I had a situation personally where my son, really, really close, he's in his late 30s. And several years ago, there was a situation that came up and I didn't even see it coming, completely blindsided. And he sends me a text and he says, Dad, I'm done. I'm like, you're done? What are you talking about? I mean, we would talk twice a week, really connected. And he had a situation going on and he got squirrely and he pulled out. And I did not hear from him for 3 years. And I lost contact with my grandchildren. And I mean, I went through the full experience of, what did I do wrong? Angry at him, angry at everybody else, angry at myself for not having seen it. I mean, cancel culture is a lot bigger than just social media. And it happens in families, it happens in workplaces, and then other family members are affected. And I felt hopeless. I mean, it's like I got up every morning and there it was staring at me, sitting next to me on the bed as I'm sitting there getting ready to get out of bed. It's there. And I mean, it just ate at me. And I couldn't let go of it. I mean, what do you do? Particularly when there's nothing you can do. I mean, that's like the definition of stress, when you have stress, but then you can't do anything about it. And thank goodness, after 3 years, suddenly he calls me up and he says, Hey, can we talk? And I'm like, absolutely. And he says, yeah, he kind of explained what happened. He was still trying to figure it out himself. And that's a very common experience. I mean, for all of us, when you don't have an opportunity to repair, it kind of gets frozen. And there's maybe some simple things that people can do. So I think number one, get insight into the role that you play and be aware if this cutoff is actually beginning to happen and you weren't even aware of it, because that's often what the case is. Number two, normalize the pattern. This feeling of the urge to disconnect is a very normal thing. And sometimes even just bringing it up and saying to the other person, you know what? When we get in conflict, I find myself having an urge to just pull away. And I really don't want to do that. Do you ever feel that as well? I mean, try to move toward not just talking about the content of a conflict, but move to the next level up where you can look at the process of what you're doing and kind of salvage it before it goes to hell in a handbasket. I mean, it is so painful. The third thing I think then that people can do is have some pattern interrupts with a response, not a reaction. I see a behavior as a sequence that begins with a trigger, and then there are thoughts and emotions, feelings. There's beliefs that people have, there are values, there are urges, and eventually it ends up in a behavior. And we try to change the behavior, but actually, there's a lot of things that we can do ahead of time to change the factors that give rise to that behavior. And that is really how can we have a response. And so can we bring a pattern interrupt in some way to move past just this normal reaction that seems to be automatic? That means maybe sometimes self-regulating and just taking a deep breath, asking the question, hey, can we do a reset on this? What would be some good ground rules for us in terms of how we're processing this? Just checking in. How would you say, what's the state of the union right now? These are all things that can be pattern interrupts instead of just reacting the way that we always do. Maybe just taking a time out, a 10-minute reset. I've seen that happen. Hey, it gets pretty hot in the meeting. People start shutting down. And then having a leader who can notice these things, pick up on it with insight and say, can we take this in a different direction? And let's take a breather. Let's come back and then move to a process comment and say, hey, I noticed when you did that, or when I said that, you kind of pulled away. What's going on with that? And then finally, open up the possibility of recovery. mean, I'll say from my own personal experience, what ends up happening through that cutoff, even though it's like really horrible, there is often a revamping of expectations, and kind of a new acceptance of the person for who he or she is. And so those are the big three things for me. Get insight into the role you're playing, normalize the pattern a bit, and say, hey, makes a lot of sense that you're feeling this way, even if you don't really fully understand it. And then do some pattern interrupts so that we don't just keep repeating the same patterns. I find that if we can just change one little thing, it can change everything if we're just really intentional and incremental in that way.
That's really good. It's really, really good. I was noticing, even as we were preparing for this conversation, some of the old, and I like this word choice, pattern rather than problem, to
Mhm.
remove some of the shame and some of the unnecessary weight that pulls me back into I'm such a horrible person, rather than, hey, I have patterns and I can change them. And some of even the things that I did as a 10-year-old that are no longer serving me in my mid 30s. And so instead of shaming that, noticing, hey, it's just a pattern and I have the ability to change them. And so we want to invite you, if you're listening to this, to consider what's one small thing you can do this week, whether it's gaining insight and maybe you want to look into an assessment for that. Maybe you need some support to do that because you're a little too close to it. And sometimes it's hard to see what might be a blind spot right in us. Maybe you need to just give yourself permission to normalize it, or have the conversation with somebody else to normalize the situation and create a vision for what we want the relationship to become again. Regardless of what it is, we want to just invite you to take a step towards growth and towards becoming the new person, because we know that while cancel culture is everywhere, it doesn't have to be the norm, and it certainly doesn't have to be permanent at all.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and we look forward to an opportunity to connect with you. I'll be reaching out and giving you the link to this so that you could maybe share it with other people. Luke, thanks for joining me today. I'm hopeful that a few folks have maybe normalized it a little bit and have gotten a little bit of insight into what are the dynamics underneath this cancel culture. It's certainly not just a social media phenomenon. It's been around for a long time, and people find it in some ways useful. There's a function for it, but it kind of doesn't work so well if you ever want to fix it. And sometimes we just need some help, need a lifeline to get a different set of eyes on the problem and have some ideas. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
See you soon.